Last week, Julian kind of led us in a discussion of a passage in Mark 2. We will pick up there with the next passage, and this one is about one of the what the scholars call a controversy story. And of course, Jesus has quite a few of those as he deals with different controversies with particularly the religious leaders of today. And this one happens to be a controversy about the Sabbath. And in our own fellowship, we have had our own controversies about the Sabbath. We'll take a look. So this passage is one that we have looked at before. We'll take a look at it again, and maybe we'll observe something new with it this time too. So here's Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath. Verse 23, one Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields. As his disciples walked along, they began to pick some heads of grain. And I quote there from, Deuteronomy 23, verse 25, as the law of Moses made allowance for this kind of thing. If you're walking through somebody's grain field or next to it, more likely, you were allowed to pick a few kernels of, a head of wheat and rub them in your hand and get some grain and eat the wheat. It's not the tastiest thing around, but it does, I have done it. And yeah, you can chew on the kernels of the wheat that way and satisfy your hunger a little bit. And if you're walking along, however, verse 24, the Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are they doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?" One of the things that they had tried to codify, what was permitted on the Sabbath and what was not. And one thing they said was not allowed was harvesting. So this they would categorize as harvesting grain. Of course, the disciples weren't harvesting. The law of Moses specifically said they shouldn't harvest somebody else's field. They shouldn't put a sickle to the standing grain. They weren't trying to get a lot. They were just getting a little bit in their hands on the Sabbath. But the religious leaders, Jewish religious leaders, had their definitions, and they just thought it was not appropriate. You didn't have to walk very far. You couldn't walk very far on the Sabbath anyway, so you shouldn't get very hungry. Maybe was part of their thinking. Anyway, they were kind of at odds with Jesus anyway. They were kind of looking for issues in which they would have just some disagreements. So this is something that they found. The Pharisees, look, your disciples are doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath, and you, as the teacher, are responsible for what your students are doing. So Jesus answered in verse 25, "Have you never read?" Well, of course they had. They just hadn't understood it in that connection. Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? And then he summarizes what David did. In the verse 26, in the days of Abiathar, the high priest, he entered the house of God, which was a tabernacle at that time, not a temple, and ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for priests to eat. And he also gave some to his companions. So here David did something that was contrary to the law. And Jesus admits, it's lawful only for priests to eat. But he is saying, well, if David could eat this forbidden bread, then why can't my disciples eat this forbidden grain on the Sabbath? He's kind of trying to make a comparison there that these are similar situations. Sometimes they argue from the greater to the lesser, or lesser to the greater. In this case, hard to, which is greater. You could say, well, bread that the law of Moses specifically says that only priests should eat. Well, that's specifically forbidden in the laws of Moses, and yet David ate it seemingly with approval from God. that it was okay for him to do that. So Jesus is arguing, well, if David could do that, so, my disciples can do it do it as well. I did want to take a look at the passage. And one of the reasons I wanted to do that is because Jesus here talks about in the days of Abiathar, the high priest. But the passage tells us that the priest's name was Ahimelech instead. So there's a kind of a historical question regarding this verse. So here, the passage is in 1 Samuel 21. David came to Nob to Ahimelech, the priest. He was the high priest in the tabernacle at the time. Ahimelech came to meet David, trembling. He said, "Why are you alone? Why is no one with you?" He knew David as the one who had killed Goliath. He knew that David was the kind of the general of one of Saul's troops. But at this time, Saul was trying to kill David. David was running away. And he did come to the tabernacle for refuge or maybe some help from the priest. David said to Ahimelech, the priest, "The king has charged me with the matter and said to me," David is basically lying here, "let no one know anything of the matter about which I send you and which I've charged you. I've made an appointment with the young men for such and such a place." Now, then, what do you have on hand? David asks. "Give me 5 loaves of bread, whatever's here. We need some food." The priest answered David, I have no ordinary bread on hand, but there is some holy bread. If men have kept themselves from women, if they are ritually clean. And David answered the priest, "Truly, women have been kept from us, as always, when I go on an expedition." Actually, we're not even sure that any men were with David. But that's part of the what David said. And Jesus was answered as if there were men with David. That's okay. The point is, it wasn't just David who ate this bread. It was also approved for eating by David's men. David as the king of Israel, maybe he's an exception, but he's also giving it to others. They were hungry. There was kind of an emergency need for the bread. And the priest authorized for some exceptional giving of this bread to the men. The vessels of the young men are holy, even when it's an ordinary journey. How much more today will their vessels be holy? Vessels meaning their bodies, I think. The priest gave him the holy bread, for there was no bread there but the bread of the presence in the tabernacle, which is removed from before the Lord to be replaced by hot bread on the day it's taken away. So it's regularly replaced. And so maybe the implication here is that they were about to replace it anyway. So we might as well give you this old bread that's been sitting out for a week. Otherwise, they just have to throw it away or the priest would eat it. And Ahimelech didn't need that much. Well, that is the example that Jesus is referring to, that David was able to be given this bread. So there's already a precedent for breaking a holiness law in favor of human hunger. So David's men can eat. On the Sabbath, they can do a small amount of harvesting to satisfy their hunger. The historical question there, though, is that Jesus called it in the days of Abiathar, the high priest. And whereas 1 Samuel tells us that the priest was actually Ahimelech. And we read in the next chapter, Abiathar was actually the son of Ahimelech. It's not two people with the same name, it's two different men. And so people say, well, how did Jesus get this wrong? That he's calling the wrong person the high priest. Scholars have wrestled with that and come up with various ways in which this might not be a contradiction. One is that he's talking about a overall time period. In the days when Abiathar was the high priest, Ahimelech, his father was high priest, also in this broader category of the era in which Abiathar was a high priest. It's kind of like an umbrella term for a period of time. And the other is that this is off by only a few days. Ahimelech, the priest, is shortly, or in only a few days from now, will be killed by the men from Saul. And Abiathar becomes high priest just a few days later. So, that, it's not off by much. I'm not sure what the solution is or what the most likely solution is, but one conclusion I do draw from this is, at least in Mark 2:26, when Jesus says, in the days of Abiathar, the high priest, something that looks like a historical fact isn't necessarily a historical fact. When we try to get a historical fact out of it, we're reading it. This is alien to its purpose. The purpose is not to tell us about history. The purpose is to tell us about what David did, and the other things are incidental. Whatever explanation we come up with for why Jesus was able to call it the days of Abiathar, all that, in some ways, any solution is possible, but it just means that what looks like a standard historical fact is not a historical fact. We have to be careful in the way we read what looks like history and say, okay, make some allowance for the way things were allowed to be expressed, either as a general time period or a few days difference, doesn't matter. But anyway, some scholars get very concerned whenever there's any historical discrepancies. And I think they are looking for details in a place that they don't need to. Jesus isn't trying to give a history here. He is simply citing a historical example about David and not the others. Nobody complained. The Jewish leaders did not complain to Jesus, oh, you've got that wrong. No, they looked at his intention. His intention was to point to what David did, David was eating the bread. The exact name of the high priest at the particular time is not that important. It's the days of David, basically. Anyway, if any of you have questions about that, maybe we can talk about that a little bit if you want. It's just something that happens to come up in the text, and the commentaries have to deal with that. About who's Abiathar and what's he doing here? The real point of the passage comes in verse 27. Then Jesus said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. He's talking about the purpose of the Sabbath. The purpose of the Sabbath, God did not invent the Sabbath first and say, oh, now I need somebody to keep the Sabbath holy. So I will create people to do that. It's not like, the Sabbath came first. No, the humans came first. The Sabbath was designed to help human beings, it is to serve human need and not to that humans have to be inconvenience like this hunger because of rules about the Sabbath. And he says, the Son of Man, Jesus is Lord even of the Sabbath. And it's really an astounding claim. He's not just saying, in a way he could say, well, any human could make this sort of decision that it's okay to pluck a few heads of wheat on Sabbath day and eat them. That's not really harvesting. That's not, they're not working as an occupation. They're not violating the Sabbath. And any human being could make that sort of decision. But Jesus is also increasing the significance of what he's saying by calling himself the Lord even of the Sabbath. It's not just that any human being can be Lord of the Sabbath, but that Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath. And it's really quite a kind of a high title. He says, I have authority over a law of Moses. And I don't know, be interesting, but Mark doesn't tell us how the Jewish leaders responded to that. It's a significant claim, and Mark includes it. And of course, Mark is writing at a time when the Christian church, Mark writes mainly to Gentiles. He has to explain Jewish customs to them. His readers don't necessarily understand Jewish customs because they're not keeping them. They're not, they know that the Sabbath is a big issue for Jews. Lots of Gentiles in the Roman Empire knew what the distinguishing customs of Jews were. They knew about the Sabbath. And they knew it was important to them. But Mark's readers, Gentiles, were apparently not keeping the Sabbath. And Mark kind of does not, as he does in several places, he doesn't draw the conclusion very strongly. He lets people come to their own conclusion on that. If Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath, if he is able then to override Sabbath regulations. So that was it. Oops, let me. In our own history, we had kind of turned that around. We wrestled with that because we wanted to make sure that people were keeping the Sabbath. We did not want to let any crack in the dike would happen so that the whole thing would come apart. So we said we wanted to say the Sabbath was made for man, therefore man should keep it. And we kind of lost touch with Jesus' stress here. Jesus' stress was not on, yes, we need to keep it. No, Jesus' stress was on, no, we need to relax our approach to the Sabbath. And as church history went on, we see further as that it was relaxed so much that, as Paul could say, the days do not matter. Some people are concerned about particular days, but others aren't, and that's okay. That's in Romans. Any questions, comments on that passage? All right.
Probably, I've been asked before because one of the definition of sin is the breaking of the law.
Right.
And so they use that. That's the reason they say, well, when you break the Sabbath, or like in case of Jesus, did they sin? That's a question. Maybe somebody might ask that question.
Yeah, there's a couple of responses to that. Jesus did say that David was allowed to do something that was prohibited to the priest. So he was already talking about, well, this would normally be considered a sin. But in exceptional circumstances, David was allowed to do it. Jesus' disciples really weren't in exceptional circumstances. It was kind of like an ordinary day, an ordinary walk, an ordinary field. There was no great emergency, but still they were allowed to do something that was not strictly speaking allowed. Jesus was indicating they should have never been that strict in the first place. And the other answer there is, which has to go deeper, that you ask, well, is this a sin? Are they just Jesus allowing just a little bit of sin? Is that okay? Well, the answer then has to say, well, no, Jesus is not allowing sin, and the early church is not allowing sin and saying people can ignore the Sabbath because it is no longer a sin. It was commanded for a specific time period under the old covenant, but it's no longer applicable today. And that requires a lot more other verses, other passages that we have to deal with regarding the end of the laws of Moses. Fermi, did that address your comment, question?
Yeah, that's very much, it proves that of course we understand. The point is Jesus never sinned. He was perfect. That's in the scripture. So I think when we start with that understanding that Jesus did not sin, Jesus did not break that law, to sin, then we begin to have more understanding on the new covenant. There's a new administration as opposed to the old.
Right. Yeah. What Jesus did on the Sabbath was not a sin at the time. He kept the Sabbath. The Sabbath was still commanded in his day, and he lived without sin. So he kept the Sabbath. So there are really two issues involved here then. One is that the overly strict rules of the Jewish leaders, they were never enforced. They were never, legally required in the first place. So that's why Jesus' disciples could, eat some grain on the Sabbath. They were not breaking the law of Moses, even though they were breaking the rules that the religious leaders had come up with. And the other issue is the law of Moses required after the death of Jesus under the new covenant? So it's kind of a switch of terms. What Jesus does here helps pave the way for an understanding of that it is no longer required at all. But he doesn't go that far yet. That has to be developed later.
Hi.
Oh, yes, Marianne.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I just would like to summarize what I understand about the Sabbath. So it's like the old covenant Sabbath is a specific day, right? But in the new covenant, it's a specific person in the person of Christ. In the old covenant, the Sabbath is resting day. But in the new covenant, it is resting in Christ as our new, the rest of resting in Christ, who gives us peace, who gives us hope, our true refuge and our true Sabbath. And the third is that the old covenant Sabbath is rules to follow, but in the new covenant Sabbath, it's a relationship.
Very good. Yeah. That's well said. It's physical is still good. We don't, we don't want to work endlessly without a break. Our bodies can take that for a little while, but after a while, it's difficult, and it affects our mental health as well.
Mike, could I add to what she said, so beautifully said? Could it also be added that that we could rest because Jesus fulfilled all the requirements of the law?
Right. Yeah, he fulfilled the requirements, and
for us.
And right. Well, for us, that doesn't mean, it doesn't mean that we don't, that it's okay for us to lie and cheat and commit adultery. So there's a different kind of law there involved. That one law is really done away. But as Marianne, was saying the Sabbath law, really, and really all of them, are absorbed into Christ, that he is the centrality of law, that our obedience is no longer to a list, but it's to a person. And that kind of changes the relationship. We still have to see, okay, well, what does this person want us to be doing? If Jesus wants us to be setting aside every seventh day, then we better be doing it. And I'd be happy to be doing it. But is that what Jesus requires? Well, the New Testament says no, he does not require that. He does want us to avoid lying, cheating, stealing from each other. For a few examples, it's a matter of relationships. Lying, cheating, stealing hurts relationships. Sabbath is not a relationship issue. It does affect our relationship with God. If we think that God wants us to keep the Sabbath and we're breaking it, then we are violating our own relationship with God. As Paul said, somebody does something they think is a sin, then it is a sin. Mm-hmm. So part of the issue is us getting informed, learning more about what the New Testament is saying and what the writings mean for us. It's a complicated issue, and that's why it took us a long time to sort these things out. As to we wanted to be loyal to what God is saying, and we should be loyal. Question is God still saying the same thing now as what he said in the days of Moses or the days of Noah or any other command that he gave in Scripture? No, there are different commandments, different times in history given for different packages of worship regulations for different purposes.
I think
worship regulations. So many worship regulations are no longer applicable in the New Covenant. All these sacrifices, the rituals, the times, the days, the seasons, all this specificity that God gave to the children of Israel. That's all. It's replaced, as Marianne said, with our allegiance to Christ. He is our Sabbath. That's where we are resting in him. Our salvation is not based on what we do, but it rests on what he has done. So that's using the word rest in a changed meaning, but it helps convey. The Sabbath also pointed toward the future, the glorious age when we will have rest from labor and sin.
So Mike,
yes,
Mike, I'm still a little confused. So the Sabbath can actually be any day of the week. Is that not true?
Yes.
Okay. And as long as you're with the good Lord on that day and observing everything you should be, the 2 commandments, then our Sabbath day is that day. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah, and Sabbath doesn't even have to be a day. It can 2 different mornings during the week. It can be different times in which I am focusing on my relationship with God. So there's a flexibility there, and part of it is that we have to, and a book I was reading this morning, I talked about, all right, we're supposed to be have faith in Jesus, but nobody has faith perfectly. So then we get all bent out of shape as, did we have enough faith? Did we have enough faith? And the author was pointing out, as soon as we try to quantify this, then we are no longer relying on faith at all. We are trying to rely on our performance. We are saying, oh yeah, I meet the list. Whereas what we need to do is say, well, yes, I do fall short, but I trust that Jesus has made up for whatever deficiencies I have. As Barb was saying, that he has been obedient on our behalf. And that's kind of the that's the catches us all. It's a catch-all. For all of our failures, Jesus has already paid the penalty. He has already died for all of our sins. And we always refer back to that whenever we have doubts. Maybe we'll get to that again a little later in Mark. We talk about the unpardonable sin.
Can I add something?
There again, we have to go back to trusting in Jesus. That He will take care of us. He knows ahead of time that we're not going to do it all right. We are going to, we're going to fall down. We're going to, we don't want to. We try not to, but it happens. And that's where that's what faith means. We have to trust Him, that our salvation is based on what He has done, and not on our imitation thereof.
Can I add something about the Sabbath, of my understanding?
Sure, Rhonda.
Well, in the Old Testament, in the Old Covenant, people did have relationships with God,
Yes.
with Jesus at the time, but sacrifices were not allowed to be offered except on the Sabbath day and by the priest. And so people could not, they may have a relationship with God, they may pray to God, but they could not offer sacrifices. And our sacrifices are spiritual. Many of our sacrifices are spiritual. And when Christ was crucified, then when the veil was rent, we had access to God 24/7. I mean, it's not just one day. Every day is the Sabbath. Every day is holy for us because we have communion with God. When in the Old Testament, they could only go through the priest, or that was how their sacrifices were made. We sacrifice spiritually, we sacrifice, we have communion with God. So that's how I've been able to understand the difference between the Old Covenant, was that with Jesus, we no longer have one day only that we can go to God, offer sacrifices, and be in His presence. It's every day is Sabbath. I mean, every day should be our Sabbath. We should be in a worship with Jesus and God every day.
Right.
Because we have the access to do it.
Yeah. In the Old Testament, everything got filtered through the priests.
Yeah.
And the temple, and Jesus Jesus is the temple in person. Jesus is the rituals in person. So that's when we are united to Him, then we've got all of that. We've got the reality of what those rituals could only symbolize.
Right.
What I find ironic or funny, Pastor Mike, is that, remember, the Pharisees limited their walking on the Sabbath, right? They have a law.
Yes.
Here they were walking with the disciples. How would they know that, So they're walking on the Sabbath. They asked the question, why are you walking with me? That's against your law.
Well, they were allowed. They had
miles, how many miles? 10
a
miles?
Sabbath day's journey. They had allowed, figured out exactly how far you could walk without violating the Sabbath.
Was it 5? I think 5 or 7 miles. I forgot.
It's so many, so many steps away from your home. But then they had some fictitious method of doubling that if they wanted to. If you, on Friday afternoon, if you left something, 1,000 paces away, you were allowed to get it and then walk another 1,000 paces.
If I were Jesus, I would walk a long ways and leave them in the middle,
Yeah, so it was, that kind of thing happens when people focus on defining rules.
Yeah.
Yes, this is allowed, that's not allowed. They create this list of rules, and the list becomes more important to them than the original meaning. In this case, Jesus is pointing to the original meaning. The Sabbath was designed to serve people. So, and you hear, the Jewish religious leaders were making it a burden. No, wrong-headed. Kind of well-meaning, but wrong-headed.
Well, Jesus was merciful. If I was Jesus, I would have, told them, hey, you're walking too much.
Yeah. Anything else? Marianne, you were moving forward like you wanted to say something else.
Me? Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, I was thinking of something, with regards to what we are studying right now. So I asked myself, is it possible to be a person who is committed to the church, to the Ten Commandments and spiritual habits, is nice, and miss Jesus completely? Absolutely. Like the Pharisees, they are learned men. They know verses, they know Bible stories, but they don't even recognize Jesus in front of them. So in application today, yeah, it's absolutely, we're so committed to, as I've said before, the Ten Commandments, committed to the works of the church, and still we can miss Jesus if we are so concentrated on those.
Yes, that's true. We can do good things, but if we're focusing on what we do, it's the wrong focus. Thankfully, Jesus has lots of mercy. Because all of us make missteps along the way, and we will sometimes, or for example, some people can get so distracted by their doing devotionals that are supposed to be for Jesus. We're so into our devotional, we say, pat ourselves on the back for doing our devotional every day. And we have missed the point again. It's not what we do, it's what Jesus has done. And our focus needs to continue to be to him. Our devotional should remind us of our need for, our need for him, that he has done what we need. And it's kind of hard to keep that focus sometimes. All right, let's look at the next controversy story, and it is also about the Sabbath. So Jesus heals on the Sabbath. It's a different kind of activity on the Sabbath, and healing is one of the occupations that the Jews said should not be done on the Sabbath. For some people, it was an occupation. And of course, the way Jesus went about healing was quite different than any doctor did by occupation. But that didn't prevent them from criticizing him. Okay, Jesus heals on the Sabbath. At another time, Jesus went into the synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Probably shriveled by being paralyzed, having no muscle, no nerves. The muscles would atrophy, and kind of the bones may have been the right size. I don't know, I wasn't there, but that might be one meaning of the word shriveled, is had no muscles because his hand had no movement. Some of them, the people in the synagogue, were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus. They were already animosity, they had animosity toward him. So they watched him closely to see if he would heal him on the Sabbath. Verse 3, Jesus said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Stand up in front of everyone." And I notice here that Jesus is not trying to do this quietly. He could have just, had the man, he's seated in the audience, and Jesus could tell the man, when you go home, you will find that your hand is healed. Jesus could have avoided controversy in such a way, but he did not want to do it. He did not want to avoid a controversy because he saw something more important going on there. So he had the man stand up in front of everyone, so everybody could see what was going on. Jesus wanted to make a lesson about not just healing, but about the Sabbath. Jesus asked them, which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or do evil, to save life or to kill? But his opponents remained silent. They didn't really want to answer that because that would make them look bad. He looked around at them in anger. Again, we earlier saw a place where Jesus, and then there was a textual question as to whether the one Greek text said he was angered, another didn't. Another said he was compassionate. Here it is clear. All the Greek texts agree that Jesus was angry. It's the same Greek word that is used for wrath. In like the book of Revelation, the wrath of God. Jesus had this anger. He said he was deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts. He was distressed because their Sabbath rules were oppressing people. And he was angry at that kind of oppression that was going on. And this is why he wanted to do this healing publicly, so he could bring the issue out into the open and say, look, you guys, all your rules are wrong-headed. You are going about this the wrong way. This is making the Sabbath a misery for people. And stretch out your hand. He stretched it out, and his hand was completely restored. In some visible way that everybody knew that this man had been healed.
Mike?
The Pharisees went out, and they began to plot with Herodians how they might kill Jesus.
Question on that, Mike.
Yes, Jerry.
It's almost like a controversy.
Oh, yeah.
For Jesus to get angry, knowing what he's doing by what he's doing with this gentleman to fix his hands, is going to incite these people to go out and put him on the cross. So to be angry about it, it's kind of like like reverse psychology or something. So Jesus knew what was going to happen, but why would he get mad? Because he knew these people would do that.
He was angry because their rules were oppressing the people. And it's not just the Sabbath rules, but also they despised people who had any sort of deformity, infirmity. I know they would blame the person. It says, oh, you have this withered hand because you sinned. You must have touched something you shouldn't have. It was a very judgmental society that was going on. And Jesus was angry at that. This rule about healing on the Sabbath was simply one illustration of the kind of judgmentalism that was going on. The people were looking for, we saw them earlier accusing Jesus' disciples. Now they're accusing Jesus, but they would accuse anybody of violating their rules. Oh, you shouldn't be doing that on the Sabbath.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And they were looking for some people to do wrong things. Instead of looking for good things and praising good things, they were looking for bad things. And they wanted to find bad things so they could criticize people. Maybe I'm too critical of them. But I know here in Mark, there's kind of an irony. Jesus says, what's lawful on the Sabbath? To save life or to kill. So they go out on the Sabbath and plot to kill.
To kill him, right. Do you think he was more angry at these people because none of them stood up and sided with him on it? And
that's an interesting question. I don't know that he was angry at all the other people in the synagogue. I think he was angry at the leaders who should have known better.
Yeah.
That's so often. Where there is when injustices happen, there is often a conspiracy. Well, not a conspiracy, an
collusion,
cooperation with this action.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so that can happen too. Yeah, the people had they didn't know how to resist. They might feel that the rules were wrong, but they didn't know how to resist. Whereas Jesus was able to articulate, to say, hey, this is why what you're doing is not right.
Yeah, Mike.
But as Jerry, you point out, Jesus knew that they were going to respond in this way, but he did it anyway.
Yes.
Mike,
Yeah.
it's in that same verse 5, it says he looked around at them in anger, and yet it also says he was deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts. That's almost like a contradiction. It's almost like, I agree with the question. I have the same, so he was angry at them, at their behavior, but also I looked up the word distress just out of curiosity, and it says anxiety or sorrow or pain at their stubborn hearts. And it's almost, it's like Jesus, the man, of course, that's a typical human response. But the distress is a recognition of the condition of their hearts. I wonder about that.
Yeah, that's interesting. It would kind of imply that Jesus kind of blamed them, but also knew that they were victims themselves of previous traditions. That he was sorrowful that society had gone in that direction, but he was also angry at what it was doing to people.
Yeah.
I don't know what, the word distressed there. Yeah, I don't know what the Greek word is or what it might mean. I didn't look that one up. But yeah, he was bothered by their stubbornness. That even though Jesus was presenting them with evidence that, Jesus is not putting ointments on the man. He's not doing any kind of work except to speak. And that's like, it should have been obvious that Jesus was not healing people. God was healing the person. So here, the Pharisees are upset that God is healing people on the Sabbath. And so Jesus says, look, you're not even seeing the obvious here. Your hearts are stubborn, and that's troubling.
Mike, just quickly.
Yes, Bernie.
I think one lesson I learned from this is that when a person has chosen to look at the other as an enemy, as in this case, these people were looking for reasons to accuse Jesus because he was a threat. And when a person, it applies to us, and when we look at a person with such an attitude, anything they do, we can already misinterpret as being negative. How much more, even Jesus, who is already perfect. When a person's attitude against a person is negative, even looking at Jesus, who is already perfect, can still be interpreted as negative. It's a human nature thing, and it's a lesson, I think, like for me, like when we look at people, especially if we really don't like them, whatever they do, whatever they say, we only see the bad things, when perhaps they're doing good things,
Yeah, sometimes people see what they want to see.
Jealousy.
Yeah, jealousy. That's comes up, pointed out later in the story. I think that they were jealous of Jesus' popularity.
Mm-hmm.
He was, the Pharisees had a respected role in their society, and Jesus was kind of weakening the honor and respect that people gave them.
That's a good point. The idea that they have status and they have position and they have the respect of the community. And here's this guy from Nazareth, of all places.
That's right. Okay, let's go back to the screen, look at the next, oh, we've got 8 minutes. We will look at the next story. Crowds follow Jesus. Verse 7, Jesus withdrew with his disciples to the lake and went out of the synagogue and went to the lake shore. A large crowd from Galilee followed him. When they heard about all he was doing, many people came to him from Judea, Jerusalem, Idumea, and the regions across the Jordan and around Tyre and Sidon. So this is apparently not just on one day. This Mark seems to be summarizing a whole lot of things. And I wanted to take a quick look at a map to show where these people were from. So there, he mentioned Galilee. That's where Jesus is, up here near the top. Make another circle there. He's up near the top of the land of Israel. But then he also mentions Judea, Samaria in the south, Idumea all the way in the very south. They weren't even natively Jews, ethnically Jews. They had been forcibly converted 100 years earlier. So, most of them had adopted the Jewish religion. But that's a long way for them to travel up to Galilee to see Jesus. And across the Jordan, that would include 3 different areas. So what's called Perea, Decapolis, Bethania, and up here you can part of the name Golanitis, or the Golan Heights. And this was mostly Gentile areas, but had some Jews living there too, scattered in it. And there at the very top, we just see the PH. That's the first start of the word Philistia. Phoenicia. And that's where Tyre and Sidon were. So some people, not from the cities of Tyre and Sidon, but from the regions of Tyre and Sidon, where there were a few Jews scattered, they also came to hear Jesus. Now, the one area that doesn't get mentioned is Samaria, right in the middle. The Samaritans did not come. There was such animosity between Jews and Samaritans that they were not involved. Now, it's interesting, Mark is writing to people in another region. They don't know where Idumea is. Their notion of geography is going to be limited. They didn't have maps like we have now. They're just place names. They didn't know whether these places were Jewish or Gentile. They were just names. So what Mark is preserving here is not really designed for his audience. It just simply reports a historical fact. That's the way Peter told the story. That's the way Mark wrote it down. But people from all over except for Samaria, were coming to hear Jesus and to be healed by Jesus.
Is it your understanding that most of those people that were coming from all over, were they Jews? Or were there some Gentiles likely interested or curious in the mix? Not the Samaritans, but other people, or were they mostly Jews?
Mark does not tell us, so I suspect that his silence there probably means they were Jews. We can't prove it one way or another, especially when he is mentioning areas in which Gentiles were a majority. A little later in the Gospel of Mark, he does talk about a Syrophoenician woman. He specifically mentioned, or Canaanite, I forget what word he uses. He specifically mentions that she was not Jewish. And he might refer to a Roman centurion. So he would point out some people who were not Jewish. Here, he doesn't point that out. That's that's something that Mark's readers, as his Gentile readers, would have still found it interesting that people from all over these places, all sorts of places, were coming to see Jesus. So they could kind of feel included in that, even if these people that happened to be coming were ethnically Jews. Verse 9, because of the crowd, he told his disciples to have a small boat, a little rowboat, not a fishing boat. That's a different word, but a small boat ready for him. It would be the small boat that they would use to go out to their fishing boat, just kind of ferrying one person, two people at a time. But it was just a small boat, small enough for Jesus to be in, to keep the people from crowding him. It's interesting that Mark doesn't tell us what Jesus did in the boat. It doesn't say he was teaching. It just doesn't say. I think we are probably meant to assume that he was teaching the people. But by being out in the boat, he prevented people from crowding him, getting too close to him. I mean, they could wade in the water, I suppose, but that's, like people could tear apart a roof to get to him if they wanted to. And some people, I don't know, Peter knew how to swim. Some people could have swum out to the boat and pulled on the edge of the boat and tipped the boat over, for that matter. But this is a method of crowd control that Jesus was using all these crowds pushing in on him were some kind of a problem. And then Mark explains, verse 10, he had healed many. Those with diseases were pushing forward to touch him. They wanted to be healed. And impure spirits saw him. They fell down before him, cried out, "You're the Son of God." But Jesus gave them his orders to silence again, not to tell others about him. He didn't want people to be listening to the demons, even if what they said was true. So this is kind of a Mark's summary of what Jesus' ministry at the time. He was reaching a lot of people.
So was Mike, was he giving orders to the people who had diseases or disciples not to give strict orders, not to tell others?
At one place, he does tell
Disciples, right?
a synagogue ruler. He healed. He brought the synagogue ruler's daughter back to life, and he says, "Don't tell anybody about it."
Correct.
Now, I don't know how he could possibly avoid telling other people about it. Says, "Look, my daughter was dead. Oh, now she's running around. Well, I can't tell you what happened." I think what it means in context is don't tell anybody else about it. People who don't tell the authorities about it. Don't advertise this to people who aren't already knowing. In this case, verse 12, he gave them strict orders. The them refers to the impure spirits.
Okay, so the people who pushed forward and he cured them, he told them not to go tell anybody. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, he's not really telling those people. But as Mark has pointed out earlier, people tell anyway. They're so happy about it that they just can't hold it in. It's just, like, oh yeah, I used to have a withered hand, and now I don't, but I can't tell you. I don't think people work that way. They're going to tell. This man from Nazareth, did it, or from Nazareth in Capernaum.
The best way.
All these people from all these different regions were coming because the word spread, no matter what Jesus tried to do.
The best way to spread the news, tell people not to spread it.
It's
Keep
just
a secret, right?
Yeah, just a secret. And so they go home and says, Do you want to know a secret?
True.
All right. That's about it then. I guess we can
Thank you.
quit for tonight and